30 pieces of silver. That was the price tag Judas put on betraying the Son of God. And for over 2,000 years, people have been trying to figure out what could possibly drive someone to do something so terrible. But here's what most people don't realize. The reasons behind Judas's betrayal are way more complex than just greed. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this story is one of the most tragic and debated moments in all of human history. Let me paint the picture for you first, because understanding who Judas was makes his betrayal even more shocking. Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples handpicked by Jesus himself. He walked with Jesus for 3 years, saw the miracles with his own eyes, heard the teachings directly from the source, and was trusted enough to be the group's treasurer. Think about that for a moment. Jesus chose him, knowing everything that would happen. Now, the most obvious reason people point to is money, and the Bible does give us some evidence for this. John's Gospel tells us that Judas was a thief who used to help himself to the money bag. When Mary poured expensive perfume on Jesus' feet, Judas complained, saying it should have been sold and the money given to the poor. But John makes it clear that Judas didn't actually care about the poor. He wanted the money in the bag so he could steal from it. So when Judas went to the chief priests and asked what they would give him to betray Jesus, they offered him 30 pieces of silver. That amount is significant because it was the price of a slave according to Old Testament law. Imagine reducing the value of the Messiah, the Son of God, to the price of a common slave. But here's where we need to dig deeper, because if you really think about it, 30 pieces of silver wasn't that much money, especially compared to what Judas had access to as treasurer. This brings us to what might be an even bigger motivation, and one that doesn't get talked about enough. Many scholars believe Judas was disappointed that Jesus wasn't the kind of Messiah he expected. See, most Jews at that time were waiting for a political and military leader who would overthrow the Roman occupation and restore Israel to its former glory. They wanted a warrior king like David, someone who would kick out the Romans and make Israel great again. But Jesus kept talking about a different kind of kingdom. He spoke about loving your enemies, turning the other cheek, and his kingdom not being of this world. Every time the crowds wanted to make him king by force, Jesus would disappear into the mountains. He refused to lead a rebellion and instead spent his time with tax collectors, sinners, and outcasts. For someone like Judas, who might have had revolutionary hopes, this had to be incredibly frustrating. Think about watching someone you believed in, someone you thought would change everything, seemingly waste his power on healing individuals and teaching about forgiveness instead of raising an army. Some historians suggest that Judas might have thought he could force Jesus' hand. Maybe if Jesus was arrested and threatened, he would finally unleash his power, call down legions of angels, and establish his earthly kingdom. In this view, Judas wasn't trying to destroy Jesus, but trying to push him into action. But there's another layer we need to consider, and this one gets really dark. The Gospel of Luke tells us something chilling, that Satan entered into Judas before he went to the chief priests. Now, this doesn't mean Judas had no choice or wasn't responsible for his actions. The Bible makes it clear he made his own decisions, but it does show us that there was a spiritual battle happening behind the scenes that we often forget about. Satan had apparently asked to sift all the disciples like wheat, but he found an opening in Judas. Maybe it was through Judas's greed, his disappointment, his pride, or his doubts. Whatever weakness was there, Satan exploited it and influenced Judas toward this terrible choice. This reminds us that the betrayal of Jesus wasn't just a human drama, but part of a cosmic conflict between good and evil. Here's something that makes this story even more tragic. Jesus knew from the beginning that Judas would betray him. At the Last Supper, Jesus even told his disciples that one of them would betray him. When they all started asking who it was, Jesus dipped bread and gave it to Judas, saying, "What you are about to do quickly." Imagine being in that room, realizing that Jesus knew everything and still gave you every opportunity to change your mind. Jesus called Judas friend even at the moment of betrayal. When Judas came with the soldiers to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he identified Jesus with a kiss. A kiss was a sign of love and respect between a teacher and student, but Judas turned it into a signal for arrest. And in that moment, Jesus looked at him and said, "Friend, do what you came for." Think about the weight of that word, friend, spoken to someone in the act of betraying you. What happened next shows us just how much Judas misunderstood what he was doing. After Jesus was condemned to death, Judas was seized with remorse. He went back to the chief priests and elders, trying to return the 30 pieces of silver, saying, "I have sinned for. I have betrayed innocent blood." But they basically told him that was his problem, not theirs. The money he thought was so valuable suddenly meant nothing to him. Judas threw the silver pieces into the temple and went out and hanged himself. The chief priests took the money and bought a field to bury foreigners in because they said it was blood money and couldn't be put in the temple treasury. How's that for irony? They had no problem paying someone to betray an innocent man, but they got religious about where to put the money afterward. That field became known as the Field of Blood, a permanent reminder of what happened. Now here's where we need to talk about something uncomfortable but important. Was Judas destined to betray Jesus, or did he have a choice? The Bible contains prophecies about the Messiah being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, written hundreds of years before Jesus was born. Jesus himself said it would have been better for Judas if he had never been born. So was Judas just playing out a predetermined role? The answer seems to be both yes and no, and I know that sounds confusing. God knew what would happen because he exists outside of time and sees everything. The prophecies were accurate because God knew what choices people would freely make, but Judas still made his own decisions based on his own motivations. He wasn't a puppet or a robot programmed to betray Jesus. He had doubts, he had greed, he had disappointment, and he acted on those things. What makes Judas's story so heartbreaking is that even he could have been forgiven. Look at Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times on the same night Judas betrayed him. Peter said he didn't even know Jesus, cursing and swearing to prove it. But after Jesus rose from the dead, he specifically sought out Peter, forgave him, and restored him. Peter went on to become a foundational leader in the early church. The difference between Peter and Judas wasn't that one sin was worse than the other. The difference was in how they responded afterward. Peter was filled with grief and repentance, but he didn't give up hope. Judas was filled with remorse and despair, and he couldn't see a way forward. He couldn't imagine that the man he betrayed would still offer him forgiveness if he asked for it. Some people wonder if Judas's remorse counted as repentance. The Greek word used in Matthew's Gospel actually means he felt regret and changed his mind, but it's not the same word used for true repentance elsewhere in the Bible. True repentance involves turning to God for forgiveness, not just feeling bad about what you've done. Judas went to the priests instead of going to God, and that made all the difference. There's also a lesson here about how sin progresses. Judas didn't wake up one day and decide to betray Jesus. It started with small thefts from the money bag. It grew with disappointment and unmet expectations. It festered with greed and possibly with pride, thinking he knew better than Jesus what the Messiah should be doing. By the time he made the final decision to go to the chief priests, his heart had already been hardened by months or years of small compromises. This pattern shows us something crucial about how we can protect ourselves from falling into serious sin. It starts with the small things we justify to ourselves. Maybe we think we deserve a little extra from the till at work, or we're entitled to take office supplies home because we're underpaid. Maybe we start to doubt God's plan because it doesn't match our timeline or our vision. These small seeds can grow into something destructive if we don't deal with them. So why did Judas betray Jesus? The truth is, it was probably a combination of greed, disappointment, spiritual warfare, and a hardened heart developed over time. He wanted money, but he also wanted a different kind of Messiah. He was influenced by Satan, but he also made his own choices. He felt remorse, but he didn't seek forgiveness from the right source. Judas's tragedy wasn't just that he betrayed Jesus, but that he couldn't believe he could be forgiven for it. His story reminds us that no matter what we've done, as long as we're still breathing, we have the opportunity to turn back to God and receive the forgiveness that Jesus died to make possible.